I wanted to talk about, I wanted to speak this morning about one aspect of the Hasidic movement that has raised issues over the years since the Hasidic movement began, and that is the lack of concern about appropriate times for davening. Hasidic Rebbes, many Hasidic shuls, daven shacharis well into the afternoon. Sometimes they'll daven mincha at night. What's that all about? Where does it come from? Can it be justified? What's the history behind it? So the first thing I want to say is that sometimes the reactions that people have to certain events and personalities and movements often guide their observance of mitzvos, which is unfortunate because that's not the way to do things. You have halacha, you have poskim, and you have to follow the halachic structure. When people don't do that, it's a serious concern. The Hasidic movement filled a tremendous need. In the beginning, when the Hasidic movement was first founded, at the aftermath of the Chmielnicki uprising, when the Chmielnicki pogroms destroyed most of the Jews and Jewish communities and yeshivos in the Ukraine and in Poland and in parts of Russia, Lithuania, Jews were very disenfranchised. There were no teachers left, no yeshivas left. Northern Poland had the yeshivos, had the intellectuals, but Southern Poland and the Ukraine were bereft of any type of Jewish leadership. When the Hasidic movement arose, it gave Jews an opportunity to be Jewish without necessarily being learned. And that was a major innovation. You could feel Jewish, you could be emotional, you could be passionate without necessarily being involved in the intellectual component of Judaism, which historically is the major part of Judaism. We know, unfortunately, that there are many, many Jews in the world who have no clue about the halachic structure of Judaism. It's cultural, it's a whatever, folk religion, if you will. But in the Hasidic belief part, without going into the whole history of Hasidus, the emotional part was very important. To daven with great fervor was more important than davening on time. And given that they were not always functioning within a halachic structure, that gave them room to kind of stretch certain boundaries in terms of Zmanei Tefillah. You can't pray whenever you want. I mean, you can recite personal prayers anytime, but Shacharis, Mincha, and Mariv have prescribed times. The Gemara goes into it. The Shulchan Aruch. There are specific times. The time for davening Shacharis is the first 4 hours of the morning. Beyond that, and you also have the biblical requirement of saying Shema by a certain time. Sof Zman Kriya Shema is an hour before Sof Zman Tefillah. So if the latest time to say Shema is, let's say, 8:30, 9 o'clock, that means davening is an hour later, the last time you can daven. And we're talking about halachic hours. A halachic hour is not 60 minutes long. A halachic hour can be 45 minutes long in the winter and 90 minutes long in the summer sometimes. Halachic hour is the division of how many hours of sunlight there are in the day, from sunrise to sunset. Now, you do have halachic differences of opinion. When does the day begin? When does it end? But it's within a few minutes, maybe up to 45 minutes in some cases. But certainly nobody would say you can daven Shacharis at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or you can daven Mincha after the sun has set. But Hasidim do this. You know, if you drive through Williamsburg or Borough Park or Muncie at 11 and 12 o'clock any given morning, people are still coming back and forth from shul. So how is this justified? And again, many Hasidic communities have produced great Talmidei Chachamim, but not everybody in the Hasidic community is a Talmudic scholar. They may be very observant of certain mitzvos, but not necessarily always within a halakhic framework. Now, I realize that might be heresy to some people to say that, but there's no halakhic justification from the legal standpoint for some of these practices. Some of the explanations and defenses of this are interesting, if not humorous, perhaps. First of all, you have some Rabbeim saying, how can you question a practice that has been sanctified by time? If people have been doing this for so many hundreds of years, how can you say it's wrong? That's one defense. Another defense is, if this were wrong, again, I'm quoting different Rebbeim. The Rebbe of Chernichov said that, normally if somebody commits a sin, like in Pirkei Avos, Avera goreres Avera, one sin leads to another sin. But the people who daven late are not sinners. They do other mitzvos with great enthusiasm. So how can you say it's wrong? That's another defense. Interesting that some Rebbeim, the Rishner Rebbe explains that you can daven late because he says when you're davening for yourself, then you have to daven on time. But when you're davening for Klal Yisrael, as many Rebbeim did, then you can do that at any time. But these are serious people giving these explanations to defend a practice that is really contrary to halakha. Again, I'm a great admirer of many things about Hasidim, but at heart, I'm a Litvak in that regard when it comes to observing halakha. One interesting explanation, the Liska Rebbe, he says that, and again, he may be reflecting on his own personal practice or perhaps some of his Hasidim. He says Hasidim get up early in the morning, and then they go to mikveh, and then they have what they call hispodidus, which is the equivalent of meditation, to commune with God. And then they say Tehillim. So their entire routine every morning is what he calls Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shemayim. So by the time they get to shul, it's already late. So they're doing mitzvos. It's in a way parallel to what the Gemara calls, the Hasidim Rishonim, the early pious individuals. Not contemporary sense, but the early Hasidim, meaning the early, very pious people, would take an hour to get ready for davening, and then an hour after davening to come down from the high. So every day it would take 3 hours to daven. So this might be an application of that. Most people, Psuke de Zimra is intended to fill that part of davening. Psuke de Zimra is officially not part of davening. Psuke de Zimra gets you into the mode, into the mood for davening, preparatory. So, but to spend hours and hours and miss the Zman Tefillah, they're trying to justify that.
But
this is again, but however, on Shabbos, since this they don't always do it on Shabbos as much as during the week, so they make davening even later on Shabbos. I was once in Williamsburg for Shabbos, and I was looking for a Hashkama minyan, and there was only one Hashkama minyan in the neighborhood, and that Hashkama minyan started at 9 o'clock. That was the Hashkama minyan. So it's a practice that some Rebbes, now, there are, as I said, there are many great Talmidei Chachamim among some Hasidic Rebbeim. Not all, but many. And some of them were very much opposed to this practice. They condemned it, actually. The Rebbe of Dinov, Tzvi Melech Shapiro, says, this is a sickness. How can you violate Sof Zman Kriya Shema, which is a biblical mandate? It's biblical, not rabbinic. Do you eat matzah after Pesach? Do you sit in the sukkah after Sukkot? No, these are halakhic timelines that we have to follow. Well, davening also has halakhic guidelines. So some Rebbeim were very much opposed to it. There's a wonderful mashal that the Rizhiner Rebbe gives. It says, a guy comes home from work every day at 5:30. Comes home, washes up, sits down at the table, and at 6 o'clock sharp, his wife comes in with a bowl of soup and black bread. That's what, or is it potatoes, or whatever. Comes with potatoes and black bread every night. That's his supper. Bulbous, potatoes and black bread. Every night, comes home, she sings up. One day he comes home, he's sitting, he's waiting. 6 o'clock comes, his wife doesn't come in. Oh, she's been busy. 7 o'clock comes, she's not there. Ah, she must be preparing a special meal of delicacies for me. 8 o'clock comes, she's still not there. Wow, what a meal she must be preparing for me. 10 minutes after 9, she walks in with the same black bread and potatoes. And he says, this is what I'm waiting for? He says, God is the same way. God is the exact same way. If we keep Hashem waiting all that time, that davening better be something extra special. So Hashem is sitting there waiting. He says, this is what I'm waiting for? So there were some Rebbeim who were opposed to this practice. But by and large, the Hasidim daven Shacharis very, very late. They try to justify it, very hard to justify. Another thing along the same lines is davening Mincha very late. That's also a problem. We are careful to daven Mincha before sunset, before Shkia. And there are variations among the Rishonim and Bali Tosos, Rabbeinu Tam especially, as to when the different times of the day occur. Does day end when the sun sets, or does day end when the stars come out? And what about the in-between period, Bein Hashmashos? There are legitimate machloksim among the poskim. Rabbeinu Tam is the exception. Great, he's not somebody to be trifled with, but Rabbeinu Tam is the one who holds that the daytime ends when the stars come out. So up until the stars come out, it's still daytime. Technically, we don't paskin that way, but there is a shita like that. There are different, but by and large, most shuls are very, very careful to daven mincha before sunset. There's a discussion whether you can daven marav right. Some shuls daven marav right after mincha. You can daven marav a little bit earlier, but then you have to repeat Kriya Shema and Sfira now after Tzesach HaChavim. But Hasidim, they're not that careful about that.
Wally,
Yes.
what about a yortzeit?
What about a yortzeit?
Let's say Monday is the day of the yortzeit, and you're basically going into Tuesday.
Ask your local Hasidic Rebbe. I mean,
I don't hold that way.
Okay, but this is what they do. Now, many places are to avoid the problem. Many places daven mincha, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to avoid any problems, and they wait until dark. Then they come back from Maariv. Many places do that. I remember once when I was saying Kaddish and I was downtown, and it was getting late in the afternoon. I went to a shul to daven mincha Maariv. When I found it, but they already had daven mincha 3 hours before. They only get together for Maariv at night. So it's tricky. Most places are very careful to daven mincha before Shkia, have a Dvar Torah for a few minutes, and then daven Maariv. So you don't do two tefillos in the same time slot. But again, I remember years ago when I was in camp in Livingston Manor. And near the camp, there was a Satmar bungalow colony. And Saturday night, 10 o'clock, 10:30, people are going out for ice cream or whatever it might be. And we're driving by the hotel, and they're still sitting at Shalashudas. 10:30 at night. Stars are out. It's pitch black. And they haven't davened they're extending Shabbos, so to speak. So again, Hasidus, if you understand the essence of what Hasidus is all about, it's more emotion-based than halacha-based. Most Hasidim try to observe halacha, but there are some that feel the emotional component is more important than the halakhic component. And this is part of the machlokas between Hasidim and Misnagdim. One of the major opponents of the Hasidic movement was the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon was the greatest rabbinic mind in modern times, pre-modern to modern times. Nobody ever comes close to it. And because he was such an opponent of Hasidus, and the fact that they were not careful about Zmanim, so Lahakis, the Hasidim, do all the things that he was opposed to, perhaps. It's very difficult to have this conversation with a Chassid. I've tried. It's very difficult to have this. You have biblical requirements about Sof Shema, Kriya Shema. You can have a halachic discussion, for example. Now, if you want to get involved on a halachic basis, the tefillos are based on the korbanos. So the mincha is based on the korban tamid shel ben arbaim, the daily afternoon sacrifice. And the blood, according to the Gemara of Zvachim, the blood of the korban mincha had to be sprinkled before the stars came out. So the end of the Zman is Shiur. When the sun sets, that blood has to be sprinkled. And if mincha is based on that, then there's no way you can daven mincha at night. Yet many Hasidic Rabbeim justify davening mincha late. Some try to do it right before the stars come out, but some are not careful. So the lack of attention, the lack of what I'm looking for, punctuality in terms of Zmanim is one of the Hasidic areas where the Litvaks are very much opposed to their particular practices, because it goes contrary to what the halachic norms are.
Wally.
There are Zmanim for tefillah, and they have to be adhered to. And all the other excuses, again, it's part of the whole Hasidic Weltanschauung, if you use that expression. Their whole outlook on life is that the nitty-gritty halachos of Zmanim are not as important as the heartfelt emotion of the prayers that you're giving to Hashem. And to them, that's more important. And that's why they daven Shacharis late and they daven Mincha late.
Wally.
Yes.
Just to clarify something, I think you're talking about Zmanim for tefillah. I think it's when it comes to making Shabbos, I think we're all on the same page of when Shabbos begins.
I would hope so. I would hope so. There is a discussion about, how it could be a problem under certain circumstances, because in some places where they would make, in some places in Poland and Hungary, they would still work up until almost nightfall.
I think in New York, New Jersey, all the Hasidim in this neck of the woods, I think we're all on the same page that we make Shabbos at the same time.
I would hope so. Yes, I would hope so. Which is why, I mean, and not because of Hasidim, but given the fact that, people don't always prepare as much as they should Erev Shabbos, you have that 18 minutes. Candle lighting is 18 minutes before sunset. So if you're late, light candles, you still have that little time span before it's really Shabbos. But again, it could happen. Let's assume you get stuck in traffic. And it's getting late on Shabbos afternoon. So under very limited emergency circumstances, you might be able to rely on Rabbeinu Tam, who was a great authority, that Shabbos doesn't begin until actual nightfall, not sunset.
Dr.
Normatively,
Greene?
normative halacha, we paskin that Shabbos begins at sunset. But Rabbeinu Tam says you can extend it a little bit later. Under emergency circumstances, you might, I'm not paskining, but you might be able to do that. Question, yes.
Yeah, Dr. Greene, I understand that at the time, at the time of after World War II, when the Hasidic communities were reestablished in the United States, I think Rav Henkin was involved. There had to be uniformity in the United States, and Rav Moshe was involved, I believe, in getting everybody to be, as Mendy said, on the same page, because some communities wanted to start Shabbos late, but they said this is not going to work in America when you have two Sabbath times starting. So that's why the Hasidim had to conform to our time of starting Shabbos at the earlier Shkia, not their Shkia.
I hope you're
That's
right.
what happened. That's what I remember learning, that it happened after World War II.
I hope so. I hope so. But Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim, I hope. But again, many Hasidic Rebbeim justify their lack of attention to Zmanim for a variety of reasons. I don't know how many are really solidly halachic reasons, but as I said, Hasidim value the passion of davening more than the requirement to daven on time. So if you were to balance the two, now ideally speaking, you could be passionate about davening on time. Everybody who davens on time should be passionate about their tefillos. If you have a choice between the two, heartfelt davening, passion davening, or just being, on the clock, this is part of the machlokas as well. So hopefully everybody will be careful about zmanei tefillah, daven shma before sof zman kriya shma, daven shachris before sof zman tefillah, and daven mincha before sunset. That would be the halachic goal. And if you do that on time and with passion, ma tov v'manoim. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a great Chodesh.
I got to run to daven mincha. Have a great Shabbos.
Did you speak to Rabbi Kannefogel, by the way?